The massive crystal chamber floated in space between two bright stars. Inside, 12 beings sat in a perfect circle, each one different from the others. Some looked like walking trees made of metal. Others were pools of living light that changed colors when they spoke. A few had too many arms or eyes that glowed, or skin that looked like moving water. This was the Galactic Council, and they ruled over thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the circle. She was human, which meant she looked very ordinary compared to the others. She had brown skin, black hair tied back neatly, and wore a simple blue uniform. Next to beings who could live for millions of years or bend light with their minds, she seemed almost boring. Elena held a small device in her hands. Inside it was everything humanity had learned about changing dead planets into living worlds. They called it terraforming, and humans had been working on it for over 100 years. Honored council members, Elena began, her voice steady and clear. We come before you today with a proposal that could change everything. We have found a way to turn dead rocks into garden worlds in just 30 years. A sound like breaking glass came from the crystal being called Counselor Zephyr. This was laughter, though it sounded nothing like human laughter. 30 years? Zephyr asked. Young human, it takes us 3,000 years to properly terraform a world. You claim to do it in 30? Elena nodded. Yes, our method is different. Instead of fighting against a planet's natural systems, we work with them. We use living organisms that can adapt and change. We help the planet become what it wants to be, rather than forcing it to become what we want. The ancient Vorlak elder shifted in its chair. It looked like a giant turtle, but its shell was covered in glowing symbols that changed as it thought. The elder had been alive for 50 million years and had seen species rise and fall like waves on a beach. Child, the elder said in a voice like distant thunder, we have been terraforming worlds since before your species learned to use fire. What you describe sounds like playing with forces you do not understand. Elena touched her device, and images appeared in the air above her head. They showed dead planets slowly coming to life, oceans forming, plants growing, animals running through new forests. The transformation was beautiful and natural, like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. These are our test results, Elena said. We have successfully terraformed 12 worlds using this method. Each one is now home to millions of people and countless other life forms. The planets are not just alive, they are thriving. Counselor Thranks of the Hegemony made a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. The Hegemony controlled most of the galaxy's trade routes and thought they knew everything about technology. Thranks had 4 arms and skin that looked like polished metal. Impossible, Thranks declared. Your species has only been in space for 300 years. We have been working on terraforming for 300,000 years. You cannot simply appear and claim to have solved problems that have puzzled the greatest minds in the galaxy. Elena felt her chest tighten, but she kept her voice calm. We are not claiming to be smarter than anyone else. We are simply offering to share what we have learned. Our approach may seem strange, but the results speak for themselves. The Nereid representative floated in a tank of water at one edge of the circle. The Nereids looked like jellyfish crossed with dolphins, and they were usually friendly to humans. But today, even they stayed silent. Let me understand this correctly, said Counselor Malthor, whose body seemed to be made of living shadow. You want us to believe that humans, the youngest and least advanced species in this council, have discovered something that has escaped our notice for millions of years? Elena nodded again. Yes. Sometimes a fresh perspective can see solutions that experience might miss. This time the laughter came from multiple council members at once. It sounded like a symphony of broken instruments. The crystal being's light flashed in rapid bursts. The tree-like Sylvani creaked and groaned. Even the pools of living energy that represented the Ascended rippled with what could only be amusement. A fresh perspective, repeated Zephyr, the crystal being. How refreshing. Perhaps next you will tell us that your cooking methods could improve our energy production, or that your music could help us travel faster than light. Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but she continued. Our terraforming method combines biological engineering with quantum field manipulation. We use specially designed organisms that can communicate with a planet's magnetic field and— Stop, interrupted the Vorlak elder. This is becoming embarrassing. Quantum field manipulation? Biological organisms that talk to magnetic fields? This sounds like the fantasy stories your species tells children. Thranks leaned forward in his chair. Perhaps we have been too kind to the humans. They control several important hyperspace routes, which is the only reason they have a seat on this council. But clearly they have mistaken our politeness for weakness. We are grateful for our position on the council, Elena said carefully. We have always tried to contribute what we can. Yes, Thrinks continued. And what you can contribute is raw materials and cautionary tales about what happens when species advance too quickly without proper guidance. Leave the real science to those of us who understand it. Elena looked around the circle of faces, or what passed for faces among beings so different from humans. She had expected some doubt. She had even expected some resistance. But she had not expected this level of contempt. The Ascended spoke next, their words appearing as glowing text in the air since they no longer had physical voices. The humans show promise in some areas, but they clearly lack the wisdom that comes with age. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, they will be ready to make real contributions to galactic science. Elena closed her presentation device with a soft click. The sound was so quiet it should have been lost in the vast chamber, but somehow it seemed to echo off the crystal walls. I see, she said simply. Thank you for your time. She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps the only sound in the sudden silence. The council members watched her go, some still rippling with amusement, others already turning their attention to more important matters. As Elena reached the door, Councillor Zephyr called out, Ambassador Vasquez, surely you are not giving up so easily. We thought humans were supposed to be persistent. Elena paused but did not turn around. We are persistent, Counselor, but we are also practical. We know when we are not welcome. Come now, said the Vorlak elder in what it probably thought was a kind voice. Do not take this personally. You are young. Your species is young. There is no shame in that. In time you will learn. Elena's hand rested on the door control. Perhaps we will, she said quietly. Or perhaps you will. She pressed the button and walked out of the chamber. Behind her the laughter started again, but it seemed a little forced now, a little uncertain. As Elena's ship departed from the council station, she sent a single message back to Earth. It contained only 3 words. Recommendation rejected. Proceeding independently. The council continued their meeting, discussing trade routes and border disputes and other important matters. None of them paid attention to the small human ship as it jumped to hyperspace and disappeared into the darkness between the stars. They would remember this day later, but by then it would be too late to take back their laughter. 6 months after Elena Vasquez walked out of the council chamber, humanity began to disappear. It started quietly, the way most important changes do. Human ships stopped appearing at the big trade stations that floated between star systems. Human diplomats stopped attending the smaller council meetings. Human merchants stopped bidding on contracts to supply raw materials to other worlds. At first, nobody noticed. The galaxy was huge, with millions of ships moving between thousands of worlds every day. The absence of a few hundred human vessels seemed like nothing. Dr. Karvak was the first to realize something was wrong. He was a Zephyrian scientist who had laughed the loudest when Elena presented her terraforming proposal. Like all of his kind, he was made of living crystal that could think and feel and change colors based on his emotions. Karvak worked at the Central Observatory, a massive space station that watched and recorded everything happening in the galaxy. His job was to track quantum energy patterns, the invisible forces that held the universe together. On a Tuesday morning, Karvak noticed something strange in his data. The hyperspace routes that humans controlled were showing unusual readings. Ships that tried to use these routes were coming out in the wrong places. Not dangerous places, just different ones. Computer, Karvak said, his crystal body flickering with curiosity. Show me all human ship movements in the last month. The computer thought for a moment, then displayed a map of the galaxy, with tiny dots showing where ships had been detected. Usually the map would be covered in thousands of dots representing human vessels. Today there were only a dozen. That cannot be right, Karvak muttered. Run the search again. The computer checked twice more. Each time the answer was the same. Human ships had simply vanished from galactic space. Karvak sent his report to the council, but they were too busy with other matters to pay attention. The hegemony was having a trade dispute with the Sylvani. The Ascended were arguing about some philosophical point that would take them decades to resolve. The disappearance of a few human ships seemed unimportant. Counselor Thranks, the four-armed leader of the hegemony, actually found the news amusing. Perhaps they have finally realized their place, he told his advisors. They will come crawling back soon enough, begging for our forgiveness. The hegemony had controlled most galactic trade for thousands of years. They were experts at predicting how other species would behave when faced with economic pressure. In their experience, isolation always led to desperation, and desperation always led to surrender. But weeks passed, and the humans did not come crawling back. Captain Elex of the Nereid Collective was the first to experience the real consequences of humanity's withdrawal. She was leading a convoy of merchant ships through what used to be the Terran route, a hyperspace pathway that connected the rich worlds of the inner spiral with the resource-heavy planets of the outer rim. The Terran route was the fastest way to move goods between these regions. It cut a journey of 3 months down to 3 weeks. The route passed through space that humans claimed as their territory, but they had always allowed other species to use it for a small fee. When Captain Wilex's convoy entered the route, something went wrong immediately. Her ships came out of hyperspace in a place she had never seen before. The stars were in the wrong positions. Her navigation computers showed error messages in languages she did not recognize. "Where are we?" asked her second-in-command, a young Nereid whose bioluminescent patches were flashing with worry. Captain Ilex checked her instruments again. According to the readings, they were exactly where they should be. But the space around them was completely different. Instead of the familiar beacon that marked the human border station, there was only empty space and distant stars. "I do not know," Captain Ilex admitted, "but we need to find another route home." The detour took 2 months instead of 3 weeks. By the time Captain Ilex's convoy reached its destination, the fresh food they were carrying had spoiled, and the medical supplies had passed their expiration dates. The Nereid Collective lost millions of credits on that single journey. Similar problems began happening all across the galaxy. Trade routes that had been reliable for centuries suddenly became unpredictable. Ships that entered human space found themselves redirected to distant systems with no explanation. Emergency beacons sent toward human territory received no response. The Council finally began to pay attention when the Vorlak Elder called an emergency meeting. The ancient turtle-like being was known for never panicking about anything, so when the Elder seemed worried, everyone listened. "Something is happening in human space," the Elder announced. "Our long-range sensors detect massive energy readings from their worlds. The patterns match no known technology." Dr. Karvak presented his latest findings to the Council. His crystal body was dim with confusion as he spoke. "The quantum fluctuations are unlike anything in our databases. According to our models, the energy sources they are using should not be possible." Counselor Zephyr's light flickered impatiently. "Impossible how?" "The readings suggest they are manipulating matter at the subatomic level," Karvak explained. "Creating new elements, changing the fundamental forces that hold atoms together. If our instruments are correct, they are essentially rewriting the laws of physics in localized areas." The council chamber fell silent. Even the Ascended, who had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago, seemed stunned by this news. "That is impossible," Thranks declared. "Our science has proven that such manipulation requires energy levels greater than the output of an entire star. No single species could generate that much power. Unless," the Vorlak Elder said slowly, "they have found a completely different approach." Dr. Karvak's next report came 3 weeks later, and it made the Council even more uncomfortable. Long-range probes had detected 17 star systems in human space, showing signs of active terraforming. Not the slow, careful process that took thousands of years, but rapid transformation that was changing entire worlds in a matter of months. The planet designated as Kepler, 442b, was a dead rock 6 months ago, Karvak reported. "Today our sensors detect oxygen in its atmosphere, plant life on its surface, and what appears to be a thriving ecosystem." Counselor Malthor, the being made of living shadow, leaned forward in his chair. "You are certain of these readings?" "I have checked them 17 times, Karvak replied. "I have also sent probes to verify the data, but what?" "The probes malfunction when they get too close to human space. Not destroyed, just confused. They forget their mission and return to their launch points with no memory of what they were supposed to do." The Silvani representative, who looked like a walking tree made of silver, creaked thoughtfully. This suggests defense systems of incredible sophistication. Weapons that attack the mind rather than the body. Or, the Vorlak Elder suggested, technology that is so advanced it appears to be magic to those who do not understand it. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. The council members returned to their homeworlds, but they found it difficult to focus on their usual concerns. Trade disputes and border arguments seemed unimportant compared to the mystery of what humanity was doing in their self-imposed isolation. Private conversations began taking place between council members. Quiet questions were asked about whether they had been too hasty in dismissing Elena's proposal. Some began to wonder if the humans had actually discovered something revolutionary. But pride is a powerful force, especially among beings who have ruled the galaxy for millions of years. None of the council members were willing to admit they might have been wrong. None were ready to reach out to humanity and ask what was happening. Instead, they waited and watched and tried to convince themselves that whatever the humans were doing, it would eventually fail. After all, no species could change the fundamental laws of science. Such things were impossible. The word impossible, however, was beginning to lose its meaning in reports about human space. 2 years had passed since Elena Vasquez walked out of the council chamber, and the silence from human space had become frightening. Dr. Karvak spent his days staring at readings that made no sense. His crystal body had lost its usual bright glow and now flickered with dim, confused colors. Every morning, he hoped his instruments would show normal patterns from human territory. Every morning the readings became more impossible to understand. "Computer," he said for the 100th time. "Verify all sensor data from Sector 7. Data verified," the computer replied in its calm voice. 17 star systems show active terraforming. Energy output in human space has increased by 4,000%. Matter conversion detected in 43 locations. Matter conversion. The words made Karvak's crystal structure shiver with disbelief. Converting energy directly into matter was something the greatest minds in the galaxy had only theorized about. Actually doing it required technology that should not exist. Karvak was not the only one struggling with these impossible readings. Across the galaxy, scientists from every major species were studying the same data and reaching the same conclusion. Either their instruments were completely wrong, or humanity had achieved something that changed everything they knew about science. The Council had authorized 3 separate reconnaissance missions to investigate. None had returned with useful information. The first mission, led by a Sylvani explorer named Thornweave, had approached the edge of human space 6 months ago. His ship had detected massive structures around human worlds, space stations the size of moons, orbital rings that circled entire planets. But when Thornweave tried to get closer, his ship's navigation system had simply forgotten where it was supposed to go. It was the strangest thing, Thornweave had reported to the Council. My crew and I found ourselves heading home with no memory of why we had changed course. Our mission logs showed that we had intended to investigate human space, but none of us could remember making the decision to leave. The second mission had suffered the same fate. So had the third counselor. Thranks was becoming increasingly frustrated with these failures. The hegemony had always prided itself on having the best military intelligence in the galaxy. Their spy ships could infiltrate any territory. Their agents could discover any secret. But human space had become completely impenetrable. "It makes no sense," Thranks complained to his advisors. "They have no technology that could stop our scouts. Their weapons were primitive when they joined the Council. Their defenses were laughable." "Perhaps," suggested one of his advisors, "their technology has improved." Thranks's forearms gestured angrily. "Improved? In 2 years? It takes millennia to develop new technologies. Centuries just to test them properly. No species advances that quickly." But even as he said it, Thranks knew the words sounded hollow. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity had changed, and the Council had no idea how or why. The Vorlak Elder was experiencing something it had not felt in 50 million years of existence: confusion. The Elder's vast memory contained the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations. It had watched species discover fire, invent writing, split the atom, and travel between stars. It knew the patterns of technological development as well as anyone in the galaxy, but humanity was not following any known pattern. "Computer," the elder commanded in its ancient voice. "Show me the progression of human technology since they joined the council." The display showed a steady, predictable line of advancement for 300 years. Human technology had improved slowly and consistently, following the same path that most species took. Then exactly 2 years ago, the line changed. It shot upward so steeply that it looked like a mistake. "Computer, verify these readings." Data verified from multiple sources. The elder stared at the impossible graph for a long time. In its 50 million years of existence, it had never seen anything like this. Species did not simply leap forward in their development. Technology built upon previous technology, step by careful step. Revolutionary breakthroughs were rare and took decades to implement. What humanity appeared to have accomplished in 2 years should have taken them 2,000 years. The most disturbing reports came from the border regions. Several planets near human space had begun experiencing what their inhabitants called miracles. On the desert world of Keth Prime, underground springs had suddenly appeared, turning vast wastelands into fertile gardens. The Kethans, a lizard-like species that had struggled to survive on their harsh world for generations, found themselves with more water than they had ever dreamed possible. The springs appeared to be natural, but geological surveys could find no source for them. The water simply emerged from deep underground, as if the planet itself had decided to become more hospitable. Similar events were happening on other worlds. Poisoned atmospheres were slowly cleaning themselves. Unstable weather patterns were becoming calm and predictable. Dying ecosystems were recovering at impossible speeds. The inhabitants of these worlds were grateful for their good fortune, but their governments were suspicious. Natural disasters could be explained by science. Natural miracles were much more worrying. Dr. Yasha Molotov of the Terran Research Institute had been humanity's liaison to the galactic scientific community. She had worked with alien scientists for decades, sharing research and building friendships across species lines. Now those same scientists were sending her increasingly desperate messages. "Please, Dr. Molotov," wrote Professor Xeraxes of the Centauri Academy, "we need to understand what your people have discovered. The readings from your space suggest breakthroughs that could benefit all of galactic civilization." Similar messages arrived daily from research institutions across the galaxy. Scientists who had once considered humans to be interesting but primitive now begged for access to human research data. Dr. Molotov read each message carefully, then filed them away without responding. The instructions from Earth were clear: no communication with galactic institutions until further notice. This silence was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of humanity's withdrawal. The humans had not declared war or made threats. They had not demanded apologies or reparations. They had simply stopped talking to the rest of the galaxy. For species that were used to negotiating and arguing and making deals, this complete silence was more frightening than any hostile action would have been. At least with hostility, you knew where you stood. The Council's emergency sessions became more frequent and more tense. Councilor Zephyr's crystal body flickered with anxiety. The Ascended, who usually remained calm about everything, projected worried thoughts into the air around them. Even the normally confident Threnx seemed uncertain. "We need to know what they are doing," Threnx declared during one particularly heated meeting. "This uncertainty is damaging trade throughout the galaxy. Our merchants are afraid to use routes near human space. Our colonies are requesting additional defense forces. The economic impact is the least of our concerns," interrupted the Vorlak elder. "If humanity has truly discovered new principles of science, the implications are staggering. We could be facing a complete revision of our understanding of the universe." Councillor Malthor's shadowy form rippled with agitation. "Or we could be facing a threat beyond our ability to understand or counter." The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. For millions of years, the Council had been the supreme authority in the galaxy. Their technology was the most advanced, their knowledge the most complete, their power unquestionable. The idea that a young species like humanity could somehow surpass them was almost unthinkable. But the evidence was mounting every day. Dr. Karvak presented his latest findings to the Council with a voice that trembled. Despite his attempts to remain professional, long-range sensors have detected what appears to be a Dyson swarm under construction around the human star system of Wolf 359. The Council members looked at each other in stunned silence. A Dyson swarm was a theoretical megastructure, that could capture the entire energy output of a star. Building one required engineering capabilities that the Council had never achieved. "Are you certain?" asked Zephyr. "The energy patterns are unmistakable," Karvak replied. "They are building a structure that will allow them to harness the power of an entire star." The implications were staggering. With that much energy at their disposal, humanity could accomplish almost anything. They could terraform 100 worlds simultaneously. They could build ships the size of moons. They could power weapons that could crack planets in half, or they could simply ignore the rest of the galaxy entirely and build their own civilization among the stars. For the first time in millions of years, the Galactic Council faced a situation they could not control, understand, or predict, and the silence from human space grew deeper every day. Captain Throg Ironscale had been a warrior for 300 years. His people, the Kelrathi, were known throughout the galaxy for their strength, their honor, and their complete inability to back down from a fight. Throg had fought pirates in the Outer Rim, battled space monsters in the Dark Nebula, and once punched a hole through a battleship's hull with his bare fists. But as his ship dropped out of hyperspace in the Proxima Centauri system, Throg felt something he had never experienced before. Awe so complete, it made his knees weak. The system was supposed to be dead. According to every star chart in the galaxy, Proxima Centauri b was a barren rock with no atmosphere and no life. It was the kind of place where only mining equipment could survive. Instead, Throg found himself looking at the most beautiful world he had ever seen. The planet glowed with blue and green colors that seemed to pulse with life. White clouds swirled through an atmosphere so clear it looked like crystal. Vast oceans reflected the light of the system's red star, creating patterns that changed like living art. "Captain," whispered his second-in-command, Scar Bloodfang. "My instruments show cities on the surface. Millions of life signs. This cannot be the same planet." Throg checked their navigation systems 3 times. They were definitely in the right place. But the dead world marked on their charts had somehow become a paradise that belonged in the most beautiful dreams of poets. "Take us closer," Throg ordered, though his voice was softer than usual. As their ship approached the planet, they received a transmission. The voice was calm and human, speaking in perfect Kelrathi. "Welcome to New Eden," the voice said. "I am Administrator Chen. We offer sanctuary to any who come in peace." Throg had expected defensive weapons to target his ship. He had prepared for hostile challenges or warnings to stay away. Instead, he was being welcomed like an old friend. "This is Captain Throg Ironscale of the Kelrathi Exploration Fleet," he replied. "We request permission to land and observe." "Permission granted, Captain. Landing coordinates are being transmitted to your ship. Please be aware that our world operates under different principles than you may be used to. Do not be alarmed by what you see." Throg almost laughed at that. He was a Kelrathi warrior. Very little could alarm him. But as his ship descended through the atmosphere of New Eden, he began to understand what Administrator Chen had meant. The cities were like nothing in the galaxy. Instead of the steel and concrete structures that covered most civilized worlds, these settlements seemed to grow from the landscape itself. Buildings curved and flowed like living things, their walls covered in plants that glowed with soft light. Streets were rivers of some crystalline material that felt warm under Throg's feet. And the people, there were so many different kinds of people. Humans walked alongside beings Throg had never seen before. Tall, graceful creatures that looked like living trees conversed with small, furry animals that spoke in musical tones. Flying beings with feathers made of light soared overhead, while underwater dwellers moved through canals that ran between the buildings. "Captain," Scar whispered, "some of these species are not in our databases. Where did they come from?" Administrator Chen appeared before they could speculate further. He was a middle-aged human with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. He wore simple clothes that seemed to be made from the same living material as the buildings. "Captain Throg," Chen said with a warm smile, "welcome to our world. I apologize if anything seems strange to you. We have learned to do things differently here." Throg looked around at the impossible city, then back at the human administrator. "How?" he asked simply. Chen gestured for them to walk with him. As they moved through the streets, Throg noticed that the very ground seemed to respond to their presence. The crystalline pathways became slightly softer under their feet, and the glowing plants brightened to provide better light. It began with Elena's terraforming proposal, Chen explained. The council rejected it because they saw our biological approach as primitive and uncontrolled. They never understood that we were not trying to control anything at all. They stopped, at the edge of a vast garden where hundreds of species of plants grew together in patterns that seemed both random and perfectly organized. At the center stood a structure that looked like a massive tree, but its bark was covered in symbols that shifted and changed like living text. What the council never realized, Chen continued, is that planets are alive. Not in the way that animals are alive, but in their own way. They have patterns and rhythms and preferences. Most terraforming tries to force a planet to become something it does not want to be. We learned to listen to what the planet was trying to tell us. Throg stared at the tree structure. The symbols on its bark seemed to be responding to his presence, forming patterns that somehow felt welcoming. You are saying that you talk to planets? In a way, yes, but it is more than that. We learned that everything in the universe is connected. Plants, animals, planets, stars, they all communicate with each other through quantum fields that most species never notice because they are too busy trying to dominate everything around them. Chen led them to a viewing platform that overlooked the entire city. From this height, Throg could see that the settlement was arranged in patterns that matched the natural flow of the landscape. Nothing looked forced or artificial. The other species in the galaxy see this as magic, Chen said. But it is really just science that works with natural systems instead of against them. When you stop trying to fight the universe and start listening to it, amazing things become possible. Scar pointed to a group of beings he had never seen before. Tall, ethereal creatures that seemed to be made of condensed starlight. What about them? They are not in any of our databases. The Luminari, Chen explained. They exist primarily in higher dimensions, but they can manifest here when the conditions are right. Before we learned to work with quantum fields, they could not visit physical space safely. Now they are some of our closest friends. Throg felt like his understanding of the universe was being turned upside down. How many species have you made contact with? Hundreds, Chen replied casually. Most species in the galaxy only exist in 3 dimensions, so they never encounter the others. But once you learn to perceive quantum fields properly, you realize that the universe is much more crowded and wonderful than anyone imagined. They visited a research facility where human scientists worked alongside beings from dozens of species. Some Throg recognized, Zephyrian researchers who had left their crystal homeworld, Vorlak philosophers who disagreed with their elders' policies, even a few Nereid artists who wanted to explore new forms of expression. But many of the beings were completely unknown to galactic science. Creatures that lived in the spaces between atoms, entities that experienced time backwards, beings made of pure thought who had learned to interact with physical matter. How do you communicate with them all? Throg asked. A young human woman looked up from her work. Once you understand quantum consciousness, she said, language becomes just one way to share ideas. Thoughts and emotions can be transmitted directly through quantum fields. It is much more efficient than speech. Throg watched as the woman communicated with a being that looked like a floating geometric shape. No words were spoken, but he could sense understanding passing between them like invisible lightning. This is why you withdrew from the council, Throg said suddenly. You found something bigger than the galaxy we knew. Chen nodded sadly. The council sees the universe as a machine to be controlled. They measure advancement by how well a species can dominate their environment. But the real universe is a living system that works best when everyone cooperates. Could you have taught this to the council? We tried. Elena's proposal was just the beginning of what we wanted to share. But they were not ready to listen. They saw our ideas as threats to their authority rather than opportunities for growth. Throg thought about the council meetings he had attended over the years, the endless arguments about trade routes and territory, the constant competition between species to prove their superiority. It all seemed so small and pointless compared to what he was seeing here. "What happens now?" he asked. Chen smiled and gestured toward the sky, where strange lights were beginning to appear among the stars. "Now we continue growing. There are entire galaxies full of species that the Council has never contacted. Dimensions of reality that no one in the Milky Way has explored. We are not isolating ourselves from galactic civilization, Captain. We are expanding beyond it." As Throg's ship prepared to depart, Administrator Chen gave him a small device. "This contains a complete record of everything you have seen here," Chen explained. "Share it with whoever you think should know. The universe is big enough for everyone." Throg accepted the device with hands that trembled slightly. He had come to investigate a mystery, and instead had discovered that everything he thought he knew about reality was just the beginning of a much larger story. As his ship jumped back to hyperspace carrying news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization, New Eden continued its impossible dance among the stars, growing more beautiful with each passing day. The council chamber had never been so quiet. For the first time in millions of years, the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in complete silence, staring at the recording that Captain Throg had brought them. The images of New Eden played in the air above the circle. Impossible cities that grew like living things, species that existed in dimensions beyond normal space, technology that worked by cooperation instead of domination, and humans walking among it all like gardeners tending the most beautiful garden in the universe. Counselor Thranks was the first to speak. His 4 metal arms trembled as he gestured at the recording. "This cannot be real. Planets do not simply become alive. Species do not communicate through quantum fields. This is some kind of elaborate illusion." But even as he said it, Thranks knew the words sounded desperate. The Kelrothi were many things, but they were not liars. Captain Throg had risked his career and his reputation to bring this information to the Council. Warriors like him did not invent fairy tales. Dr. Karvak's crystal body was flickering through colors that had no names. "The quantum readings match what we have been detecting from human space," he admitted reluctantly. "If this is an illusion, it is one that extends across multiple star systems and involves energy patterns we cannot duplicate." The Vorlak elder had been silent for 3 days, processing what it had seen. 50 million years of experience had taught it to recognize truth, even when that truth challenged everything it thought it knew. "It is real," the elder said finally, "and we have made a terrible mistake." Counselor Zephyr's light pulsed with agitation. "You cannot seriously believe that humans have discovered some new form of science that escaped our notice for millions of years." "Why not?" asked the elder. "We believed that terraforming required thousands of years and massive mechanical intervention. They showed us it could be done in decades using biological systems. We dismissed their approach as primitive, but perhaps primitiveness was exactly what was needed." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Primitive. The Council had used it to describe humanity's proposal 4 years ago. Now it seemed like the most advanced approach anyone had ever conceived. Counselor Malthor's shadowy form rippled with uncertainty. "If we accept that their terraforming method works, what about the rest? Species that exist in higher dimensions? Planets that are somehow alive? Consciousness that can be transmitted through quantum fields? Science fiction," Thranks declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" asked the elder. "Or is it simply science that we never learned because we were too busy trying to control everything around us?" The debate continued for hours, but everyone in the chamber knew it was really about pride. For millions of years, the Council had been the ultimate authority on science and technology. They had guided younger species, shared advanced knowledge, and maintained order throughout the galaxy. The idea that humans, the youngest and seemingly least advanced Council members, had somehow discovered truths that escaped everyone else was almost impossible to accept, but the evidence was overwhelming. Trade routes were still disrupted. The quantum readings from human space continued to show impossible energy patterns. And now they had Captain Throg's testimony, supported by detailed recordings that their best experts could not explain or duplicate. After 3 days of argument, the Council finally made a decision. They would send a delegation to the edge of human space with a simple message: "We wish to talk." The message was transmitted on all frequencies. It was repeated in every language known to galactic science, It was sent with diplomatic codes that indicated the highest level of authority and respect. The response came 6 hours later. It was brief, polite, and delivered by a familiar voice. The Terran Federation acknowledges the Council's message. Ambassador Vasquez will meet with your delegation at coordinates to be transmitted separately. Please note that our space operates under different physical principles than standard galactic territory. Do not be alarmed by what you observe, Elena Vasquez, the woman who had walked out of their chamber 4 years ago. The woman they had ridiculed and dismissed. The woman who apparently now spoke for a civilization that had transformed itself beyond recognition. The Council's delegation consisted of Councillor Threnks, Dr. Karvak, and a small diplomatic staff. They chose a route that would take them through several systems near human space, hoping to gather more information before the actual meeting. What they saw during that journey changed their understanding of everything. The space around human territory was filled with structures that should not exist. Massive rings orbited dead stars, somehow extracting energy from sources that should have been exhausted millions of years ago. Space stations the size of planets hung in stable orbits without any visible means of support. And everywhere they looked, there were ships. Not the familiar metal vessels that most species used, but organic-looking craft that seemed to swim through space like living creatures. Some were the size of cities, others no bigger than a person, but all of them moved with purpose and grace that made conventional starships look clumsy and primitive. "Captain," Dr. Karvak said to their pilot, "are you certain we are in the right sector?" The pilot, a competent Nereid officer, checked her instruments for the 5th time. "According to all navigation systems, yes. But these structures are not on any of our star charts." The meeting point was a space station unlike anything in the galaxy. It looked like a massive flower made of crystal and light, with petals that opened and closed in response to approaching ships. As their vessel drew near, the station seemed to recognize them and adjusted its configuration to provide a docking port that perfectly matched their ship's design. Elena Vasquez was waiting for them in what could only be called a garden. Instead of the sterile conference rooms typical of diplomatic meetings, she had chosen a space filled with plants and flowing water and soft light that seemed to come from the air itself. She looked older than she had 4 years ago, but there was something different about her appearance. She seemed more present, more aware, as if she was seeing things that others could not perceive. "Councillor Thranks, Dr. Karvak," she said with a smile that held no trace of anger or resentment. "Welcome to New Harmony Station. Please sit wherever you feel comfortable." The chairs that appeared were perfectly suited to each being's physiology, despite being made from what looked like living wood that had grown into exactly the right shape. Thranks tried to maintain his diplomatic composure, but the words that came out were not what he had planned to say. "We owe you an apology." Elena tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For dismissing your proposal, for refusing to listen, for treating your people as inferior when we clearly understood nothing about what you were offering." Elena was quiet for a moment, and Thranks could see her considering her response carefully. "You owe us nothing," she said finally. "Your reaction taught us something important about the nature of true progress." Dr. Karvak's crystal body flickered with curiosity. "What did it teach you?" "That wisdom cannot be forced on those who are not ready to receive it. The Council rejected our terraforming proposal because it challenged your understanding of how the universe works. But that rejection freed us to explore ideas we never would have considered if we had stayed within conventional thinking." Elena gestured toward a wall that became transparent, revealing a view of space filled with impossible structures and beings of light moving between the stars. "We spent 4 years learning to listen instead of control, to cooperate instead of dominate, to see the universe as a living system instead of a machine to be operated. What we discovered is that reality is far more wonderful and interconnected than anyone imagined." Thranks looked out at the dancing lights and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: humility. "Could you teach us what you have learned?" Elena smiled. "We would be happy to share what we know. But first you need to understand that this is not about human superiority. It is about remembering something that all species knew once but forgot, as they became focused on power and control." "What did we forget?" asked Dr. Karvak. "That we are all part of the same universe. That cooperation creates more than competition ever could. That listening is more powerful than speaking. That questions are more valuable than answers." Elena stood and walked to the transparent wall, Beyond it, the stars seemed to pulse with life and meaning. "The Council is welcome to join us in this exploration," she said, "but not as rulers trying to control a new territory. As students learning to see the universe with fresh eyes. As partners working together to discover truths that none of us could find alone." She turned back to face them. "The choice is yours. You can continue trying to maintain control over a galaxy that is much smaller than you thought. Or you can help us explore a universe that is infinite and alive and waiting for us to remember how to be part of it." Thranks looked at Dr. Karvak, then back at Elena. The crystal scientist was glowing with colors that indicated wonder and possibility. The counselor's own metal body felt lighter than it had in centuries. "What would you need from us?" Thranks asked. "Nothing," Elena replied. "This is not about what you can give us. It is about what we can discover together. The universe has been patient with us, but it has so much more to show us if we are willing to learn."